Yo, welcome back everybody to a brand new video here on the second channel. It is now time to do the World Championship 2024 tier list video. Of course, Worlds is just around the corner. The biggest tournament of the year is coming up, and I thought it was about time to finally talk about where I think the meta is right now heading into the World Championships 2024. Of course, it's going to be a big tournament with Shrouded Fable being legal. The meta has been shaken up quite a bit since the old meta of Twilight Masquerade. So I thought it was a good time to talk about where I think the format is right now, what decks are good, the decks to beat, and what decks you 100% need to respect going into this tournament. Of course, I'll leave a link to my tier list down in the description below if you want to go try it for yourself. And if you're new here to the second channel, make sure to subscribe down below. We're on the road to 16K subs. And if you want to enjoy the video, make sure to leave a like on the video. It'd be greatly appreciated. But without further ado, let's get into the tier list. I'm doing a bit of a different tier ranking this time. Usually I would do like S tier, tier 1, tier 2, tier 1.5, stuff like that. But I've changed it up a little bit. I've seen a lot of other tier list videos doing tiers by S, A, B, C, D, which, I mean, doesn't really like make, like, it doesn't sound like what the format is. Like, you know, there's no like B tier deck. It's more like tier 1, tier 2. But I'm going to try out this formula for today's video. Let me know what you think of the idea of doing S, A, B, C, D instead of tier 1, tier 1.5. Because that maybe can get a little confusing. So I wanted to mix it up a little bit for the video. So starting us off, we got Charizard Pidgeot. Now Charizard got a gigantic boost with the new set. Having cards like Dusknoir, Dusclops, and Fezandipity do make the deck a lot stronger. And Charizard is definitely one of the feared decks for this tournament. And I'm actually going to put it in S tier. I think, without a doubt, Charizard is one of the top decks in the format going into the World Championships. It's easily going to be one of the best decks for the tournament and one of the big decks you have to beat. I know the deck has kind of underperformed in the online tournament scene. I think that's mostly because everyone's trying to beat Charizard, but going to the World Championships, I do think Charizard Pidgeot Dusknoir is by far and away one of the best decks in the format because I think the deck is insanely powerful. It's really, really good with Dusknoir now. And it's definitely a deck you have to respect and beat. I without a doubt, think this deck is going to be played and is going to be popular. So I definitely got to put Charizard Pidgeot in S tier. Now, there's another deck I actually want to put in S tier, and that is Regidrago. I think both Charizard and Regidrago are the two best decks in the format right now. Undisputably, these two decks, I think, are the kings of the format. You could make the argument Regidrago is actually the BDIF right now. Regidrago is being hyped up a lot right now, and with the addition of Kyurem, Fezandipity, I mean, the deck just has so much power, and it really does bully a lot of decks out of the format. It does have its bad matchups. Your Raging Bolt matchup and your Lugia matchup specifically are not very good, but Regidrago is just such a strong, aggressive, and powerful deck. With all the different options it has, with the ability to threaten Kyurem now, the deck does feel like it is one of the top decks in the format. And I definitely want to say that Drago and Charizard are going to be the two big decks to beat at Worlds. Whether or not you can consider both these decks top decks in the format, you know, post-Worlds, this tier list is going to look a lot different probably. But I think without a doubt, if you're going to the tournament with a bad Drago and Charizard matchup, you're probably going to not make day 2. You're probably going to do really poorly at Worlds if you do not at least respect the power of Drago and Charizard. Both these two decks, in my opinion, are the two decks to beat this weekend, or this next weekend at the World Championships, and you got to be able to respect and beat these decks. Because if not, Charizard and Regidrago are going to absolutely destroy you. These are easily the best decks right now by far. And like I said, you can make the case for Drago being better than Charizard. You can make the case for Charizard being better than Drago. Drago is a little bit of a less consistent deck than Charizard, but Drago's power level is a lot more higher than Charizard's power level. So it's kind of give or take. Next up, we have the ancient decks. We got Roaring Moon, Dunsparce, or Roaring Moon, whatever. I would argue it's a D tier deck. I'm not sold in this deck right now. I don't think it's got the best matchup spread. Roaring Moon EX does feel a little underwhelming right now in our format, mainly because Frenzy Gouging, while it's good against stuff like Charizard and Regidrago, when they have threats like Dusclops and Dragapult against you, it gets a little sketchy. I don't think that like the Roaring Moon deck is very good right now. You could maybe play like a One of Moon EX in an Ancient Box deck, but I definitely don't think the deck is all that great. Speaking of Ancient Box, next up we do have Ancient Box to talk about here, which I guess is no longer playing Koraidon. It's all about Walking Wake now. But anyways, yeah, I think Ancient Box is C tier. I'm a big fan of this deck, but I don't know how good this deck really is. It actually has had some decent online tournament results recently, but I can't really say that the online tournament scene is going to automatically decide what's meta at the World Championships, so I don't know how good Ancient Box really is. One of the issues that it has right now is one of its best matchups in Gardevoir is starting to slip in popularity, and I don't know how this deck really stands up to decks like Charizard and Regidrago. I think Regidrago farms Ancient Box when they have the ability to use Goodra. They might even be playing Noivern in the deck. If you run to Drago and Noivern, it's even worse. Kyurem, Dragapult is pretty bad too for Ancient Box. I don't think that that Ancient Box beats the two top decks right now, which is why I don't know if I can rank this deck any higher than C tier. It's definitely not a bad deck right now. I'm not saying the deck is terrible. It's definitely strong, and it does bully on other big decks like Quad Thorns, Gardevoir, Shempow, stuff like that. But when you're standing up against those two big decks in Charizard and Drago, I'm not sure this deck has a good time into those two decks if played properly. Speaking of Charizard, we got another Zard variant. We got Zarbibs. D tier, I mean, the deck's just not very good. The deck's just going to get pulverized by Regidrago. It's just not even in the question. Charizard Bibarel is a bad deck right now. Probably doesn't even be in the tier list, to be honest with you. But next up, we have the Loyal 3. Now, I know a lot of people are really hyping up Loyal 3 right now. And to be honest, I kind of want to put it between B and C. It hasn't really had results yet. And I think that is one thing holding the deck back. And I don't know, maybe by the time Worlds does happen, Loyal 3 could have won like 2 online tournaments, and all of a sudden I bump it up to B tier. I don't think the deck is bad. Is it the best turbo deck in the format, though? It's definitely up in the air. The deck, I think, definitely has a fighting chance into most of the top decks. Like, I think your Drago matchup is 50-50. Your Zard matchup's also fairly close, but I don't know how good the deck ultimately is. It doesn't have the results yet. I don't think it's worth putting in the D tier by any means, but I do think that C tier, for right now, is a good place to put the Loyal 3. The deck does have the potential to be a better deck in the format than C tier, but we'll have to see where Loyal 3 goes in the couple weeks. And maybe if it performs well at Worlds, maybe I'll be proven wrong. Next up, we have the Arc Piles. Arc Armor Rouge, probably somewhere between C and D. Like, I don't think Arc Armor Rouge is, like, fantastic right now. I would argue it's more of a D tier deck. Like, is it the best Arc deck to play right now? Maybe. Like, it's not a bad deck by any means, but I don't think the deck is, like, super fantastic. Like, I don't know, like, if you were to, like, I would argue it is better than Moon and Bibzard by far. Like, it's better than Moon, Bibzard by a long shot. It actually has a fighting chance against some of these decks, but I don't even know if Arc has a good Drago matchup. I don't think Arc's, Zard matchup is, like, bad either. Like, usually you're okay in a Zard with Arc Armor Rouge, but when they have, like, Dusclops now, it gets a little awkward for your deck, so I don't know. Like, it's probably D tier. Arc just kind of struggles right now into some of the big decks. Arc Control, honestly, I'm down to put all the Arcs in D tier. I think Arc is definitely falling off a little bit. I don't know, the way the meta is going right now, I just don't think Arc can really shine. Your matchup against Zard has all of a sudden become a little bit harder now when they have access to Dusknoir and Dusclops. Regidrago, to me, doesn't feel like a good matchup for Arceus either. I mean, what's the best Arc deck? Is it Arc Control or, like, well, not even Arc Control, like Arc Grabber with, like, Radiant Zard and stuff like Cornerstone Ogerpon, the ones from the online tournaments? Is it Arc Armor Rouge or is it Arc Tina? Which Arc deck is the best right now? Probably would be the more, like, Arc Bibarel, Cornerstone Ogerpon deck. That's probably the better way to play Arc right now. And then probably Arc Armor Rouge would be next. And Arc Tina feels like it's like the worst of the good Arc decks if I were to rank them. I mean, there's like a lot of different Arc decks theoretically, but these are probably the only 3 ones that I think would actually see play. Shenpao backs Caliber probably feels like a B tier deck. Shenpao definitely is not in a bad spot right now. With Zard getting more popular, that's a good thing for the deck. But the problem is Shenpao's Drago matchup's a little shaky when they have Kyurem and Dragapult. That matchup becomes a little daunting. It's kind of hard to beat Drago with Shenpao because if you want to put a Manaphy down to stop Kyurem, then you're limited to how many Bidoofs and Frigibaxes you can actually bench, which makes Dragapult even stronger. But if you don't bench the Manaphy, you try to go triple Frigi, they're just going to Kyurem you. So it does feel pretty bad, not going to lie. Shenpao definitely feels like that Drago matchup is a 50-50. Like, if you go first, you're probably okay, but if you go second and they Kyurem you or they Dragapult you turn 2, it gets a little awkward. It's definitely in B tier right now. It might struggle against some of the other weirder archetypes like Quad Thorns. I think stuff like the Control Snorlax decks are definitely something you have to worry about. But, like, your Zard matchup isn't bad. Your Drago matchup's very much a 50-50 in my opinion. Decks like Lugia and Gardevoir are still good. They're just not as dominant as they used to be, but they're still out there. And you're probably going to hit one at Worlds, most likely if you make it to day 2. So it's not a bad deck for the tournament. Definitely B tier. Maybe an underdog deck for the tournament, in all honesty. It definitely feels like a underdog style deck. Guardy. Now, Guardy has, in my opinion, slipped off of the S tier status. I think it's an easy pick for A tier. It's still a very strong deck in a vacuum. It still has Flutter Mane. You have Devo, which can help against Zard. You have, Unfair Stamp, the Klefki, the Monkey Dory. Like, the deck still has all the broken pieces it needs to be good. It just kind of gets knocked down a peg because the 2 best decks are very versatile, or very hostile towards Gardevoir. So, like, Regidrago destroys Gardevoir. Charizard destroys Gardevoir. Now that they have Dusknoir and Dusclops, that Charizard matchup becomes even harder. So Gardevoir definitely falls down a peg. It's still A tier though. Like if there's any deck that could make it back in S tier after Worlds, it would probably be Gardevoir. I'm gonna be honest with you. Gardevoir is still that good of a deck, but I think it has to be knocked down a peg for the World Championships. If I'm going to the World Championships, I might be okay with taking a bad matchup against Gardevoir because of the two top decks being very hostile towards it. Not to mention Gardevoir isn't even going to be like the best play for Worlds, not even because of the meta that surrounds it, but just because of like the ties and stuff. You don't want to take ties at Worlds, right? So less people might be inclined to play Gardevoir if they don't want to tie as much. So it's like the deck might not be that popular. Like it might do well. Like I'm sure somebody might play it and have like a good run with it. I wouldn't be surprised to see a Gardevoir or two in top 8, but I'm not saying the deck is going to be popular. Like you could honestly go through the whole tournament without hitting a Gardevoir. It's possible. The deck might not be as popular. It's still very strong, and I still think it's one to be respected. Don't forget about Gardevoir. It still exists. Don't shut your brain off and be like, Gardevoir sucks, I'm not going to hit it. You could still hit it and get completely destroyed by it. Next up is the Ogerpon Dusclops deck. Put in tier C by now. It did have that crazy online tournament result. You know, I did a video on it, hyped it up a little bit, kind of gassed it up. Twitter was kind of talking about it all day. But I don't know how good the deck actually is right now, like post, now that the hype's died down a little bit. People realize the deck's okay. It's fine. As a big basic deck with like the options it has, it's definitely not bad. Is it better than like the Loyal 3? I don't know. It's probably somewhere in between like Loyal 3 of like power level. It's like not a bad deck, but it's fine. It's decent. Like C tier, I think is a good spot to put the deck. All right, Quad Thorns. Genuinely thinks I'm gonna go on a limb. This actually might be a B tier deck. Quad Thorns actually feels like it's a deck that is not bad right now. I'm not even kidding on that. It has a lot of good matchups. I mean, taking it that your Zard and Drago matchup, I actually don't think is bad at all for the deck. Like, you're shutting off so much of Drago's engine with Thorns. Charizard, if they're cutting the Bibarel out, which I have seen some Zard lists playing Pheasantipity over Bibarel, are now going to have an even harder time into the Iron Thorns. Iron Thorns does feel like it's a pretty underrated deck right now. Like, I think a lot of the decks in B tier might actually be in that category of these might be underrated, because I do think Quad Thorns definitely is an underrated deck and truly deserves to be in that B tier, in my opinion. You can call me, you know, a little overreacting to how good this deck is. I do think Quad Thorns is genuinely a good deck right now. It's a B tier deck. It's not going to be any higher because it does have its inconsistencies. It's definitely flimsy. It has a few glaring weaknesses, but I don't think the deck is like bad by any means. I do think it is truly a good B tier deck right now. Like looking at what it beats, I mean, it's pretty darn good. Like you beat Lugia, you auto win Lugia completely. If like they don't play Flutter Mane, which I don't really think Lugia does right now, like you just completely auto win Lugia. Your matchup into Shempow's good. Your Guardy matchup isn't bad either. It is winnable. It can be close, but the matchup isn't bad when you have Lost City. Your Drago matchup's not bad. Drago playing Canceling Clone is a bit of an issue. That's like the only thing holding this deck back is Drago having Canceling Clone makes the matchup a lot harder. But I think your Drago matchup is fine in my opinion. I still think you're favored into it. Next up, we have the Dragapult decks. I am a Dragapult stan right now because of how much Zardpult I've been playing. And there's 4 different builds of Dragapult that are being played. You got the Pidgey build. So Pidgeapult, as it's called. I would argue it's a B tier deck. Yeah, it seems good. The ability to add Dusclops in the deck feels strong. Now, this is Dragapult without Charizard, by the way. Like, it's Dragapult with Pidgeot, Dusclops, no Charizard. Just strictly Pidgeot, Dragapult. Dragapult's your big attacker. You might be playing Charizard, a Radiant Zard in the deck, but you're not playing Charizard EX. This deck does seem decent. I think the addition of Dusclops is nice. Your matchups are a little weird. Like, I don't think your Drago matchup is fantastic. I don't think it's, like, unwinnable either, though. Plus, your Zard matchup seems good. That's, like, the one thing I'll say about Dragapult right now is any Dragapult variant you play is going to be favored, or at least should be favored into Charizard. So at least you're beating one of the top decks in the format. Next up is Zatupult. Probably C tier. Same with Lost Pult. I'll just put Lost Pult and Zatupult in C tier. They're both decks that I think just kind of... They're definitely good, and they have good things about them, but I wouldn't really consider these two decks, like, the best way to play the archetype. Like, if I were to pick a Dragapult deck, I would just want to put a Pidgey on the deck. You know what I mean? Like, I would first and foremost put Pidgey on my Dragapult deck. I don't think Zatupult is a bad deck. Like, probably might be better than any of the decks in C tier already, but I don't know if I can call Zatupult and Lost Pult any good. Lost Pult genuinely might just be a D tier deck. Actually, you know what? Yeah, Lost Pult is a D tier deck. I don't even know why I put it in C tier. It's 100% a D tier deck. It is the weakest build of Dragapult right now, mainly because you get farmed by Kyurem, so Lost Pult just auto loses to Regidrago pretty much. I don't even think it's worth, talking about that deck right now, but Zatupult is fine. Don't think it's bad, but I would say it's weaker than the Pidgey builds. I'm going to put in C tier. I would just classify Dragapult Xatu as like the ancient box. Like, you might see 1 or 2 in the tournament. That's about it. Like, that's basically where I'm classifying Xatu Pull right now. If you go to a League Cup with 80 people right now, you might see 2 people in the tournament play Xatu Pull. Same thing with ancient box. You might only see like 2 people playing it. But as I think you're going to see more Pidgey Pult builds. Speaking of Pult with Pidgey, we got Pultzard. My boy, my dog, my deck. This deck, yeah, I think it's B tier. It's weird right now because you gain a good matchup in Charizard, but you gain an awkward matchup in Regidrago. The Drago matchup for Dragapult Charizard, it's not great. To be honest, with all the games I've played with the deck and all the tournaments I've played with it, I generally have only played against 2 Regidragos. That's literally it. I've played against maybe 2 or 3 Dragos. I'm 1-1, no, 2-1 against Drago right now. Like, I don't see a lot of Drago in my area, to be honest, or I've dodged a lot of the Regidragos, but the deck doesn't have the best Drago matchup, especially now when they have, like, Pheasantipity. Their deck gets a little bit more consistent. I will say, though, if you're playing Dragapult Charizard, if you know you're against Drago, it's really good to go first in that matchup. But, yeah, your Drago matchup's not very good, or it's a little shaky for sure, where the Zard matchup is a lot better. That's one of the highlights of playing Dragapult Charizard, is you have a better Charizard matchup, than a Drago matchup. So it definitely feels like a B tier deck right now. I'm, saying that on the purpose of being a biased person because I love this deck, but I do think it is B tier. Like, post, like, Twilight Masquerade, this deck would be A tier. Shroud of Fable format, bump it down to B tier. Next up is United Wings. Man, I kind of think it's between C and D. Because, like, generally United Wings might actually not be, like, the worst deck. If you can literally dodge every deck with a Dragapult in it, I think United Wings actually isn't even that bad of a deck. But I can't say that I can want to play it when Drago is just so popular. United Wings is definitely an underdog deck. Like, I'm honestly going to be surprised if someone doesn't play it and, like, does well with it. Like, there's a good chance somebody makes, like, day 2 at Worlds with United Wings. Like, somebody will do it because it's United Wings. Everyone wants the deck to do good. It does get a small power boost with Dartrix in the format. With Charizard being really popular for the tournament, it's definitely possible for it to happen. It could be something similar to what we saw at NEIC in 2023, where we saw Alex Szymanski go on a decent run with the deck and dodged a ton of Lost Box, which is like the deck's complete auto loss. So, like, if you're dodging all the Regidrago, United Wings actually has a good chance of doing okay. So, like, to me, it feels like it could be a C tier deck, but man, that Drago matchup it scares me. You have to worry about both Drago and Dragapult decks, so, like, you have to worry about not only Regidrago, you have to deal with the Dragapult archetypes, which is also kind of scary. Generally, though, not a bad deck, but I don't know if I can put it in the C tier. Like, man, I want it really badly. The deck definitely has legs, but we'll have to see. Hopefully someone makes day 2 with it. Next up is Goldengo. Probably C tier. Like, just kind of, it is what it is. Goldengo's not that bad of a deck. It just, nobody really plays it. It's not terrible, though, by any means. Like, you're fine into, like, Zard. Your Drago matchup is, I guess, 50-50, mainly because they can cripple your setup pretty easily. But if you can set up against Drago, you can one-shot the Drago. Like, any deck that can one-hit KO a Regidrago very easily, I think is very good right now. And Goldengo is a deck that does have the luxury of doing that, but I don't think Goldengo is, like, super good or anything. Like, it's just bottom of the barrel C tier, in my opinion. Next up is Gouging Fire. Yeah, I mean, like, maybe D tier. Like, it's not really, like, a popular enough deck for me to be like, the Gouging Fire is insanely broken. But honestly, I don't think your Regidrago matchup is bad at all. That's one thing I'll say about Gouging Fire. You have a good matchup into Regidrago, so if you're expecting more Regidrago than not, Gouging Fire isn't the worst deck you could bring to the World Championships, but I don't know if I could call it any higher than, like, a D tier. Like, kind of like United Wings. It's in that category of, like, the deck's okay. I don't know if I can classify it higher than D tier. Gouging Fire also suffers some consistency issues, which is my other issue, but it isn't terrible into Regidrago, which is a good thing. And your Dragapult matchup's not bad either. Next up is Dialga. D tier. Kind of like Gouging Fire and Dartrix. The deck does feel like it's just kind of not the right time to play it. That's truly what I feel about Dialga United Wings, is like, it's just not the right time to play the decks right now. Dialga isn't a terrible deck, but you have a bad Drago matchup, mainly because they can cure him all your Metangs, which is, like, really bad. Your Charizard matchup isn't bad by any means, but, like, even then, like, now that they have Dusknoir, it gets a little bit more trickier. I think your Guardy matchup is abysmal. That's one of the things that makes Dialga bad right now, or even in the past format, Twilight Masquerade meta. Twilight Masquerade Dialga was bad because your matchup against Guardy is not good at all. Your Guardy matchup with Dialga is abysmal, and that's another issue the deck does face. So, like, your matchup spread is, like, not the greatest right now. It's just not the right time for Dialga to be good. Next up is Lugia, A-tier deck by far. I think Guardian Lugia are the only two decks right now in the A-tier. Maybe there's another deck. We'll talk about that when we get there. But I do think Lugia and Guardia are easy picks for A-tier. Like, they definitely have potential to be top decks, but I wouldn't put them any higher than A-tier. Like, they're not the two decks that I'm going to be looking to beat at the World Championships. Going to the World Championships, I would rather look at beating Zard and Pult, or Drago, sorry, before Guardian Lugia. But Lugia is still a very strong deck. Actually, Lugia bodies both Drago, and, you know, it's okay against Gardevoir. Especially if Gardevoir's not playing Hammer or Temple anymore, it's not bad. Your Drago matchup is very good. That's one thing I will say about Lugia. You have a very good Regidrago matchup. The matchup is, you know, has answers. Like, they can definitely use Kyurem against you. They can kill your rats and stuff before they set up. But overall, I think Lugia is pretty solid into Regidrago, which is a good thing. Your Zard matchup is not bad either. It might get awkward because of Dusknoir now, but, you know, you still have Cinccino, which is good in that matchup, right? So, Lugia definitely feels like an A-tier deck right now by far. It feels like a very good deck for Worlds. Like, it actually might be a deck that will see a lot of play at the World Championships. Next up is Lost Box. So, I definitely wanted to mention Lost Zone archetypes. I know Lost Pull was mentioned, but that deck sucks. Lost Zone Box. So, whether we're talking about it with Moon or Thorns, Hands, like the NEIC build, Lost Box feels like it's fallen off a little bit. And I don't know if I want to call it B or C tier. Like, B tier might be the comfort pick for it. Lost Box does have a few good things going for it. Its matchup into Lugia and Zard isn't bad at all, but your Drago matchup might be problematic. Now, I don't know the best way Lost Box can beat Drago, whether or not you stick to the Iron Thorns build where you can shut off their abilities, or you go back to a Roaring Moon build where you can use Roaring Moon against the Regidrago to insta-KO it. So I'm not sure what the best build of Lost Box is, but that's like the one thing hurting Lost Box right now is Regidrago's popularity. If Regidrago is one of the best decks in the format right now, Lost Box is going to struggle into it, and that is a bit of a scary thing. But again, your matchup against Zard and Lugia isn't terrible right now, and those are two decks that I definitely expect to see being played at the World Championships. So definitely not a bad pick for the tournament, but I can't really call the deck any higher than a B tier in my opinion. That Drago matchup just feels really shaky, and I can't really think of any good, you know, countermeasures to beat the matchup. Like, I don't know if Roaring Moon is good enough when they can, you know, use Drago against you and stuff. I just don't know how good the matchup really is for the Lost Box matchup. Lost Tina, probably C tier. It's a cool deck. I would argue your Drago and Zard matchup might be close. Like, your Drago matchup is scary, but you have Giratina. You can one-shot the Drago. You can Star Requiem if they Gudra. Your Charizard matchup's always been decent, so it's not a bad deck by any means. It's probably just C tier. Kind of like, it's like Goldengo, you know, where it's like, yeah, the deck might see play. And it's Goldengo type stuff, you know. Next up, we have Sablezard. Probably C tier. I don't know if Sablezard is, like, really all that good right now with, like, the four big decks being Lugia, Gardevoir, Drago, and Charizard. I mean, your best matchup out of those four is probably Charizard, and that's probably about it. Like, I think everything else is probably slightly unfavored to, like, maybe close to 50-50. Your Drago matchup doesn't seem very good at all, in my opinion. Like, I feel like Gudra just kind of farms you. Next up, we have... Oh, and Kyurem, obviously. Miraidon. Probably B tier. Miraidon has been getting some results in online tournaments, and the one thing I will say about Miraidon, it can beat anything that's not Charizard. Your Charizard matchup is the worst thing about playing Miraidon. So if you're playing Miraidon at the World Championships, and your opponent's flipping over Charmanders, might have a bad time. But to be honest with you, the matchup can be beaten. Like, if you have Raichu in the deck, you know, you tempo enough with Iron Hands. If they're playing all these two-prize bench sitters to support the Charizard, it gets even better for Miraidon. Like, the matchup isn't unwinnable. I'm not saying it's an auto loss, but it's definitely not your best matchup by far. But I think Miraidon's matchup into Drago isn't bad. I think your Guardian matchup's been decent. Your Lugia matchup is pretty good, too. So you're beating some of the top decks right now in the format. Feels like a B tier deck. Next up is Control. I'm going to put Pidgey Control in B tier. I don't think this deck is going to be very popular at the tournament, though there will definitely be people who do play Control for Worlds. Like, without a doubt, there's going to be a couple people playing Control of the tournament. There might be some new technologies we haven't seen yet. I know there's been, All Blitzle's been playing the Control Luxray EX deck, and maybe that deck will see play at Worlds. Who knows? But, yeah, Control to me feels like a B tier deck. It might be a better deck right now, obviously, but it's not popular enough. Like, you don't have to respect Control, in my opinion. What you might have to respect, however, is Snorlax. So I wanted to highlight real quick. Snorlax is probably B tier. You do have an insanely good matchup into Zard, I guess. That might be about it. Like, I don't know if you're beating Regidrago. It feels like Regidrago, if played well, probably B2. If they have Turo Prime Catcher, I think the matchup's pretty bad. Gardevoir is beatable for sure, but still a close one. Lugia's abysmal. So, like, you're probably taking, like, a weird matchup throw with Snorlax, but I don't know. You're also playing at the World Championships where, you know, you do not want to tie, and that's a big issue with playing these control decks. So, that's why I'm putting these 2 decks in B tier for the World Championships. Though, like, going to the tournament, I definitely would consider respecting Snorlax, but I don't know if I would expect to see that much Snorlax. But I definitely want to respect it for sure. But it's like, how much do you really want to respect the deck? Next up is Raging Bolt. I'm not going to lie. I am leaning towards A and B for this deck. It's definitely on the border of A and B. This deck does feel really good. The one thing I love about Raging Bolt, you destroy Regidrago. Your Regidrago matchup is very, very favored. Your Zard matchup, you know, it's close. Your Guardy matchup, it's close. It's unfavored. Your Lugia matchup, it's close. Like, Raging Bolt doesn't have any good matchup other than Regidrago. I do think Regidrago is by far your best matchup. But the deck just does what it does the best out of any deck right now in the format that goes kaboom. Like, it's the best turbo deck by far right now. And that is the best selling point about playing Raging Bolt. And especially for the World Championships, it doesn't feel like a bad deck. I'm definitely going to put it in B tier. Generally, this deck does feel like an A tier deck. Like, it actually feels like this actually could be an A tier deck at best. But I think for now, I'll call it a high B tier deck. Though A tier actually might be where Raging Bolt actually is right now going into the World Championships. Sableclops, probably C tier. It's a cool deck, and I do think that it is very strong when it works. Like, when Sableclops gets going and it sets up the Sableye really quickly, you're doing a lot. Like, it's really hard to lose with this deck when you actually get things going really fast, but other times the deck's kind of a pile. Probably a C-tier deck, in my opinion. It's like Sablezard, you know? It's kind of like, if the deck, you know, can function, it can function. And then finally, we have Future Hands. Honestly, I'm kind of leaning towards D tier for the deck. I think that the deck's fallen off. It's a worse Miraidon, in my opinion. Future Hands isn't bad, but the format isn't right for it. That's the issue. Like, yeah, you're okay into Lugia. Your Guardy matchups, like, I guess not that bad either, though I think a good Guardy player beats you. Your Zard and Drago matchup seem kind of weak, and that's the main issue with Future Hands is you're taking bad matchups into 2 of the top decks, and I don't know if I want to do that. So I think Future Hands is kind of a dud right now, just kind of a D tier deck. It's just not the right time to play the deck. Kind of like where I would classify, you know, Gouging Fire, Dialga, and United Wings, and Arceus. Just not the right time to play these decks. But there you have, folks. That is my tier list for the World Championships 2024. I'm sure there might be some more surprises to come out of the World Championships than what I've listed, but I do feel like this is where the meta is right now heading into the World Championships. Whether or not you want to agree with me with some of my decisions, like whether or not you want to agree putting Iron Thorns this high, because I do feel like some of these decks do feel a lot better than people are giving credit for, and I do think that this is a decent, accurate look at where the meta is right now going into the World Championships. Definitely, I think the 2 decks to beat are going to be Drago and Charizard. Gardevoir and Lugia might be, you know, not respected as much, and they have a good chance of coming in and doing really well, and all these B-tier decks also have a good chance of making top 8. So I wouldn't be surprised to see any of the decks B-tier and above be in the top 8 for sure, and maybe there'll be some underdogs this tournament at the World Championships. I'm definitely excited to see that go down this next weekend at Worlds. Well, let me know what you thought of the tier list down in the comment section below. Once again, I'll leave a link to this tier list in the description if you want to go try it for yourself and all that good stuff. If you're new here to the second channel, make sure to subscribe down below. Like I said, we're on the road to 16,000 subs. Hope you all enjoyed, and I'll catch you on another tier list video, or video in general, on the second channel very soon. Have a good rest of your day, and bye-bye.